Shalom. This is Reverend John Ferret, and welcome to Truth Nuggets 15. Now, this is a vidcast as opposed to a podcast. A podcast is audio. A vidcast is video, obviously. And in this vidcast, in Truth Nuggets number 15, we're going to be focusing in on the Jewish feast of Purim. And we're going to be focusing on this feast in a very unique way. And you'll recall that Purim is a result of the events in the book of Esther. And Esther was the heroine in those events back in 479 BC, when she was married to King Ahasuerus, Xerxes. And she saved all of the Jewish people throughout the empire of Persia from genocide. But before we begin, let's do this. And just as in Jesus' day, so too today, we'll do a blessing before we get into the study of God's Word, just like Jesus would have done when he would have gone to the synagogue to study the Torah. So please repeat after me the Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher bakar banu, mikol ha'amim, ve'natan lanu et torato, ve'nevoim hatovim, ve'natan lanu et habasora Mashiach Yeshua. Ve'natan lanu et habrit chadasha. Baruch atah Adonai noten hadevrei emet. And together as one, let's say this in English. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has chosen us from all people and given us his Torah and the good prophets, and given us the good news of Messiah Jesus, and given us the new covenant. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the words of truth. So, in this lesson, we're focusing in on the Feast of Purim. We're focusing in on the book of Esther, but we're going to be looking at the book of Esther in ways that have escaped us. We're going to focus on a very small detail in the text of the book of Esther. And for many of us, we've read it, we've seen it, and probably just kind of let it be, because it didn't seem to really have any dramatic impact on us. But this is the very words of God. And considering that, we have to ask why. Why did God put this detail in there? Why did the Lord do this? So we're going to focus in on that small detail in the book of Esther, and wait till you see where we end up. And it's not my opinion, it's not my theory. We're going to be taking a look at the very words of God, all based upon one small detail that seemingly we overlook in the book of Esther. Now, I have already done a lesson, a podcast, so it's audio, on the book of Esther and the Feast of Purim. You can take a look at that. Go to the website, www.lightamenorah.org. All one word, Light of Menorah. Menorah spelled Menorah. And if you go there, look up Truth Nuggets 14. And the title of that podcast is Not by Chance, but by Design. This one is entitled the same. When you go to that podcast, what I've done with the book of Esther is we've taken the book of Esther and we put it back into its historical context. Most of us, Jews and Gentiles alike, we look at this book, Esther, and it's almost becoming like the Cinderella story of the Bible. We've been so affected with videos like or movies like one night with a king. And we don't deal with the truth. We don't deal with the stark truth of the book of Esther. So check it out. Check it out and see Purim and all of its stark reality. So I maybe have piqued your curiosity. What is this small detail that we've missed? Come, let's go see. Now, the whole book of Esther takes place in the ancient capital of Persia, which was Susa. You can see it there on the map, about 200 miles north of Kuwait, about 1,600 miles east of Jerusalem. Now, all the events happened in 479 BC as it relates to Esther, married to King Ahasuerus, which is Xerxes. Here we're looking at a little red box, and that little red box indicates where the ruins of the palace that Esther would have lived in. It is now located in the modern city in Iran called Shush. Shush is about 50,000 people. And so we have this cool aerial view. And when we come down into the city of Shush and actually visit the archaeological site, we're looking at the palace ruins. This is what they call the palace of Darius, but Darius is Xerxes' dad. The father-in-law of Esther, and he's already dead by the time Esther shows up, he began the construction, and Xerxes continued it. And this thing's about just the palace alone is about 250 acres itself. It's a massive palace. Here's another look of the ruins, but now it's labeled. And you can see that indeed there in the red square is the king's throne inside his private residence. The black box that you see in the foreground is the harem, also called in Persian the night station. And indeed, here is a reconstruction by archaeologists of what the main hall would have looked like in the harem quarters in the private. And more than likely, when Esther has her famous one night with the king, it was probably in the private residence, because indeed the harem, the night station, is so close to indeed the private residence. You're looking in the back at the Apadana, and the Apadana is the royal audience hall. And so you'll recall when Esther went into the king, and she had told Mordecai, her cousin, that indeed if she goes in there without being called to the presence of the king, that she could be killed. That happened in the Apadana. And so indeed we're taking a look at a model of what the Apadana would have looked like. It would have been called the Hall of 100 Columns. And here we're looking at another part of a model of the Apadana, and indeed the throne where Xerxes would have been sitting to receive the guests and dignitaries who came to visit him in his kingdom. And indeed this is where Esther would have come. We're looking indeed at the throne pedestal. They found that in the area of the Apadana in the palace. And that throne pedestal is right there in the center of 4 gigantic other columns. You can see the column bases there in red. So you can imagine the grandeur of this place. So what's this detail that we've missed? Well, it's related to the villain in the book of Esther, and that is Haman. He was the one that planned to annihilate all of the Jews throughout the Persian Empire, which basically means every Jew in the entire world. It was genocide. Clearly, Haman can be labeled as anti-Israel. Now, who is this guy? Where does he come from? So now we're going to focus in on a detail that seemingly we overlook. So let's consider this in the book of Esther, chapter 3, verse 1. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. So we often overlook the fact that Haman is an Agagite. He's not even a Persian. Why is this here? Why does God place it here? And on top of that, he's the son of Hammedatha and he's an Agagite. So where does he come from? So let's consider the following. You're looking at a map of central Israel, and you'll notice a place called Gilgal. Archaeologists and Bible historians were trying to figure out the place of Gilgal. Now, there's two of them. One in the Jordan Valley, because the Hebrews, when they're coming out of Egypt and they cross the Jordan River, they actually have an encampment at Gilgal outside of Jericho. Before, if you recall, they marched around the city a number of times and blew the shofars and the walls came tumbling down. That Gilgal is near Jericho, about a mile north, they think, of the Jericho site. However, when we're dealing with King Saul and we're dealing with the prophet Samuel, they meet at a place called Gilgal. And archaeologists and Bible historians believe that it's someplace in the central mountain range, probably north of Bethel. Now you're looking at a picture now of an area near what archaeologists believe is ancient Bethel. And this is not Gilgal, but it looks like Gilgal. So I wanted you to see this to at least get an idea of what it may have looked like. So we're going to be focusing in on King Saul and his encounter with Samuel. And these events happened 600 to 700 years before the events in Esther. Esther, the events happened in about 479 BC, and we're talking about 1100 BC when King Saul was king of Israel. And we'll read about some events in 1 Samuel 15. Let's read it. So Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as you go to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He captured Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all night. So again, what we have, the Lord wanted Saul to destroy all the Amalekites, all their flocks and herds. He does attack them, but there's a problem. The problem is he doesn't obey God. He spares one Amalekite, King Agag. Wait a minute. King Agag is the king of the Amalekites. Therefore, King Agag and his descendants would be called the Agagites. This is Haman's ancestor. This is just amazing, and it's a real possibility. You can imagine if Agag, we don't know his age, let's say he was a grandfather at this time, and let's say he had 4 sons. Let's say he had 8 grandsons. part of the family could have moved prior to this time period, and indeed centered themselves in northern Israel and southern Syria, in Babylon, and so on. So it is a possibility indeed that Agagites would have survived this. Now let me take you to the area of Rephidim. We don't know exactly where it is. Those people who say that Mount Sinai is in the southern Sinai Peninsula, the traditional Jebel Musa, mountain of Moses, and I've been there, I've climbed it. They say Rephidim is about where that location is, just a few miles from the mountain. And the same thing for those who believe that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. The approximate location for Rephidim, very close to Jebel al-Laz, is indicated with a star. But realistically, in terms of real archaeology, we do not know where Rephidim actually is. Okay, so we remember Haman. He's an Agagite. An Agagite because he comes from King Agag. He's a descendant of King Agag. But Agag is an Amalekite. And the first time we read about the Amalekites is when the Hebrews are attacked coming out of Egypt. So when we take a look at this picture of the Sinai, and obviously this is a modern picture, you can see the roadway there and the Jeep right at the lower end of the picture and a tourist bus a little bit further down. But can you imagine if this is where Rephidim is, or what it might look like? Can you imagine all the thousands and thousands of the Hebrews down there in the valley on the other side of the bus? The Amalekites attacking, coming down this roadway? And we take a look at Exodus 17, 8 through 11. This is where we read about it, that Amalek came and fought against Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, "Choose men for us and go out, fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." Joshua did as Moses told him and fought against Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So it came about when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And we let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. So can you see Moses? Can you see Aaron and Hur there on that little hill off to the left, looking over the battle? Their leader, their general, being Joshua. So they defeat Amalek. However, God makes a very special statement and a very special prediction of the future. This is in Exodus 17, 13 through 16. So Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Joshua, that I," meaning the Lord, that's what it means, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar and named it, "The Lord is my banner." And he said, "The Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation." So when we're reading these statements that God makes about Amalek, in the JPS Torah commentary, probably one of the most celebrated Jewish commentaries on the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, they really try to help us understand the Hebrew, not the English. And in there, Nahum Sarna, who is the scholar who wrote the JPS Torah commentary for Genesis, he basically says God is kind of trying to saying, not remember, but don't forget this. Keep this in mind all the time. Let it be with you all the time. And the thing that you are to remember, the thing that's to be with you, is God, I will ultimately defeat Amalek. But the Lord doesn't say how. So, 300 to 400 years after the events in the valley of Rephaim, is King Saul. Was he to be the one? Because he was supposed to kill King Agag. He was supposed to kill all the Amalekites. And he spared King Agag. Saul didn't do it. And again, we see that picture of King Saul and King Agag. But as we realize this, we have to remember what God said. He said, I will ultimately defeat Amalek. There's two verses that I believe are related to this. The first one is Isaiah 14, verse 24. Now, in context, what's happening here is God is talking about Assyria and the judgment that he is going to, the wrath that he's going to pour upon Assyria. But it's the first part of the verse that I really believe not only related to Assyria, but this is related to our God. Just listen. The Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, surely, just as I have intended, so it has happened. And just as I have planned, so it will stand. And when we go to Jeremiah 32, in verse 27, we read, behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is anything too difficult for me? Boy, we read these two verses. And the one thing that's pretty clear, nothing is going to stand in God's way. Absolutely nothing. If he is going to ultimately have victory over the Amalekites, there's nothing's going to stop it. God planned it. It's part of his design. He can't be stopped. So Haman, definitely, he's anti-Israel. The Amalekites are anti-Israel. But is there more? Are there more connections? Indeed. Come with me to the ancient city of Beersheba. The city of Beersheba and the ancient city of Beersheba is about 45 miles south and west of Jerusalem. The modern city is quite a big city, about 200,000, maybe more, maybe 220, 230,000 people in these days. The ancient archaeological site is to the east of the modern city of Beersheba. You can see Beersheba, the modern city, there in the center, upper center of the picture, and the archaeological site right in front of you. And the archaeologists have dated the habitation of this place back to the 4th century BC, and that means this would have been 1,000 years before Abraham. There probably was a settlement there at that time. We don't know if it was named Beersheba or the fact that Abraham named it Beersheba when he dug his well, but there would have been a settlement there. Some people take a look at this well that they see at the archaeological site, and they say, oh my goodness, Abraham dug a well at Beersheba, Isaac dug a well at Beersheba, this must be their well. Well, it isn't. This is dated to the Iron Age, which is going to be the time of David or later. But fascinatingly enough, they did find an ancient well, and the archaeology has placed it between the modern city and the archaeological site in a wadi. And they say this could be a likely location because Abraham himself was not a city dweller. He was nomadic and living in tents. So I just love this picture of perhaps looking at this and thinking that it's Sarah and Abraham and their son Isaac. But the reason why I bring you to Beersheba is this. When you take a look at Genesis 26 and 27, and you can study this on your own, at the end of 26, Isaac has settled near Beersheba. He has settled an agreement with King Abimelech of the entire area, and indeed this happens at the ancient site of Beersheba. In the next chapter, we get into where Jacob deceives his father, Isaac. And we know this was instigated by his mom, Rebekah, because God speaks to Rebekah and tells her when she was pregnant that she has 2 boys. She's carrying 2 boys, and that the younger is going to serve the older. Now she takes, you might say, matters in her own hands and initiates the deception. And so indeed, Isaac is deceived, thinking Jacob is Esau. Isaac thinks Jacob is his firstborn, and so therefore blesses him with the blessings of the firstborn. And Esau's cut out of it. So we all remember that. However, I want to emphasize some other things about Esau. And that is, when we take a look at this picture of Jacob and Esau when they were boys, notice the color of Esau's hair. Red hair. When you go to Genesis 25, verse 25, we talk about the birth of Esau, and he was born with reddish hair. The Hebrew word there is admoni, and it says that as he grows and he gets married and so on, he is the father of Edom, the Edomites, which is the Hebrew word for red. So when we take a look at Genesis 36, verses 1 through 12, we find something very, very awesome. One is, there, Esau is Edom. He has a number of wives. One of them is Basemath, Ishmael's daughter. So I just find it interesting. Esau is cut out of the covenant. Ishmael is cut out of the covenant. And all of a sudden, Esau and Ishmael are somehow getting connected, where Esau is marrying into Ishmael's family. Now we have both families that are out of the covenant, cut out of it, getting together. I find this fascinating. But one of his wives, Adah, bore Esau Eliphaz. That's his firstborn. And Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on. But Eliphaz had a concubine. And there, in the last verse, we read, Timnah was a concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, and she bore him a son by the name of Amalek. This is amazing. Esau said he was going to kill his brother. That's in Genesis 27:41. He was so angry with being deceived and having his blessings of the firstborn taken away from him. Now, he never killed his brother. If you recall that Esau and Jacob actually reconciled a little bit later on, that's when Jacob comes back from Haran with his wives, Rachel and Leah, and his children. However, when we take a look at the history of Israel, we find that the Edomites are always considered definitely enemies of Israel all throughout their history. They were always anti-Israel. Now, what's fascinating is this. The descendants of Esau are the Edomites. One of the wives is a daughter of Ishmael. Perhaps many of the Arab nations come from Ishmael. There's a debate on that, but it seems possible that at least some of the Arab tribes came from Ishmael. Amalek is a descendant of Esau. Amalek is an Edomite. And all of them are anti-Israel. These connections are amazing. I think I've mentioned to you that I'm not teaching my opinion, and I'm not teaching my view or my theory. Haman is an Agagite, and we're taking it to places that I really believe God intended it to be taken. These connections are amazing. Haman is an Agagite. We find out that Haman is an Amalekite. An Amalekite is a descendant of Esau, and so therefore the Amalekites are part of Edom. They're part of the family. This is all family stuff. But we read this, remember in Isaiah 14:24, what I intend, God says, it's going to happen. Nothing's going to stop it. We read that in Jeremiah 32:27. Is there anything too difficult for me? There's nothing too difficult for him. He will finally defeat Amalek, a part of Edom. So is there more? Do the connections just end here? No, they continue on. If you think it's amazing now, it gets even more amazing. From Esau, the Edomites, the Amalekites, Agagites to Haman, they're anti-Israel. And it's already quite amazing. But the feast of Purim, the fact that Haman was so anti-Israel that he wanted to annihilate all of the Jews on the face of the earth, and he's part of the family. He's part of those parts of the family who are anti-Israel. Where will this take us? In the Old Testament, Edom, you can see the area of the kingdom of Edom south of the Dead Sea and into the mountains of Jordan and the Arava. We're here looking from the west to the east across the Arava, the dry valley, and into the mountains of Edom. In Jesus' day, the people of Edom moved into actually southern Israel. And matter of fact, their territory bumped into the kingdom of Judah, which was north of this area. We're looking at an ancient archaeological site, an ancient city called Tel Maresha, the city of Maresha, which happened to be the capital city of Edom in Jesus' day, in Greek, Idumea. We're taking a look at one of the houses that was found, dated probably, I think, to the 1st century, maybe even a little after. But again, it was a very significant city there in southern Israel. And like I said, it was the capital city of Idumea, or Edom, at that time. But then one day, perhaps in the Herodium, Herod's palace near Bethlehem, or maybe even in the city itself, we read about the Magi who came to Jerusalem, and they came to King Herod, and they asked him, hey, we've been following this star. Where's the Messiah going to be born? Isn't he going to be born here? And if you recall, Herod checked the scribes, and they found that indeed that the Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. In Matthew 2, verses 1 through 8, we read, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived at Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw a star in the east, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. Now that's what it says in the New American Standard. You guys, the translation from the Greek to the English is just horrible, because the Greek word there is tarasso. And tarasso means to strike one's spirit with fear and dread. Herod was so troubled, deeply troubled. It's almost as he was fearing that he was about to be killed, that a dread came upon him, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. And when you have found him, report to me, so that I too may come to worship him." I found this picture, an artist's rendering of Herod. The cruelty, the evil of this king in this painting is quite apparent. But Herod, for all his strength and might and power, a spirit of fear and dread came upon him. Herod was terrified. Nobody terrified this guy. Of a baby? Why is he terrified of a baby? Herod. With this spirit of fear and dread, he was so terrified. If this is the Messiah, could it be that Herod is a dead man? Herod, I mean, something awful is going to happen to him? But why? Why don't we see this? The understanding here. What's going on? What's behind the fact that he's so terrified? So terrified that he sends a squad of soldiers into Bethlehem to kill the baby boys that are in and around the area. Probably not many. It didn't make the news. And it could have been 5, maybe 10 children, maybe more. It wasn't, thousands or hundreds, because Bethlehem was a very small town. But why kill the baby? One of the things that we find is this. Edom in the New Testament, as I mentioned, is in southern Israel. Mareshah is the capital of Edom, which is called Idumea. And it's really possible that Mareshah is Herod's home, where he grew up as a boy. When you read about Herod, we find out that he is an Idumean. He's from Edom. He is part of the family. He's an Edomite. On top of that, his father Antipater was from Edom, an Edomite. And his mother was an Arab. Arab. It is possible that some of the Arab tribes that make up all of Arabs came from Ishmael. This is amazing. Esau, the Edomites, the Amalekites, the Agagites, Haman, and now Herod. And we could say that they're anti-Messiah. It doesn't say that Esau is anti-Messiah or anti-Christ. It doesn't say the Edomites are anti-Messiah or anti-Christ. Or Haman. But they were against Israel. Haman wanted to completely annihilate all of the Jewish people. And thus from Haman, you might say the devil would have victory in the sense that he stopped Messiah from coming. Yeah, we would say that all of them are anti-Messiah. But truly Herod, that he is an Edomite. He is truly anti-Messiah, which in English means anti-Christ. Now Herod is not the anti-Christ. But all of a sudden we have this king who is a picture of the Antichrist. And a picture of generations of the hatred of Israel. And again, we take a look at that picture of Herod, and we go to a famous prophet, Obadiah. A book of prophecy of 1 chapter. And we read, "For the day of the Lord draws near." Now, the day of the Lord always means the end times. It's always related to the coming of Messiah. For when the day of the Lord draws near on all nations, when the times of Messiah are going to come, when the end times are here, as you have done, it will be done to you, meaning to Edom. Obadiah is a writing totally against Edom, which means totally against Amalek, which means totally against Herod. Your dealings will return on your own head. Because just as you drank on my holy mountain, all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and swallow and become as if they have never existed. But on Mount Zion there will be those who escape, and it will be holy. And the house of Jacob, in other words, the house of Israel, will possess their possessions. The house of Jacob, in other words, Israel, will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be as stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them, so that there will be no survivor of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. And the implication is, Edom, Idumea, all of the descendants of Esau will be totally obliterated in the day of the Lord, in the times of the Messiah, and in the times of the end times. The very interesting comparison. You have Jacob, who is Israel, and Esau, who takes on a new name, Edom. Jacob had 12 sons and grandsons. Esau had sons and grandsons. And from Jacob, from the descendants of Abraham, comes Esther, the heroine in 479 BC, as we remember the Feast of Purim. But out of Esau and out of Edom comes Haman, who wanted to annihilate all of the Jewish people. And so we have Jacob and Israel and Edom and Amalek. And from Jacob comes Jesus, Yeshua, the Savior of the world, born at the time of Herod, who came from Esau and Edom and Haman and Amalek. For when we take a look at the birth of Messiah in that small little village of Bethlehem, we can say, when we read the Obadiah 1, we can truly say the baby won. It wasn't by chance, but it is by design. Purim, lots, chances. No, this is the plan of God. And indeed, Yeshua is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And Edom and Amalek have faded from history. Indeed, the baby won. It is interesting to note that after Jesus' death and his resurrection and his ascension, after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, basically, Idumea, Edom, fades from history. The Herods, the family of Herod, who's from Idumea, who is an Edomite, and so therefore his family is as well, fades completely from history. It's as if God defeated the Edomites and the Amalekites. The Amalekites are only part of Edom. Are we surprised? Remember Isaiah 14:24. God is saying, if I have designed it, if I have said this is what's going to happen, it does happen. And then in Jeremiah 32:27, is anything too difficult for me? Edom is gone at the time of Messiah. However, the Jewish people take this idea of Edom and they refocus it. Now, Edom has always been an eternal enemy of Israel. You can look, there's so many, just look up Edom in your Bible, in Jeremiah, in Ezekiel, Psalm 83, that's a good one. One of the first enemy of Israel in Psalm 83 is Edom. It is believed among the Jewish people, based upon the Word of God, that the Edomites were part of the Babylonian takeover of Jerusalem. And they took advantage of the situation to control parts of Judah. Now, this is hinted at in two different places. You can look that up in Psalm 137, verse 7, and in the prophecy of Obadiah in verse 11. Now, during the Second Temple period, there was a belief. Now, this is in Jesus's day. I'm not trying to say all the Jews believed it or all rabbis were teaching this, but there was a belief, it's in the ancient literature, that the Edomites actually were the ones that burned the first temple, and they also interfered in building the second temple, which was finally, you might say, completed by Herod the Great. There was this intense hatred of Edom over all the course of time. Matter of fact, Edom was compared to a black boar, a black big pig. Now remember, Herod was Idumean. He was from Edom. I think we're seeing aspects of why they hated Herod so much, because he was an Edomite. Now, another thing to remember as well, though, is this. You remember that I told you that Herod was deeply in fear when he found out that the Messiah was probably born in Bethlehem. Why was he in fear? It so happens that during the Maccabean revolt, and after, you might say, the Jews controlled Israel, before Rome comes in, all of the people in Idumea were forced into Judaism, including Herod. He was forced to become a convert to Judaism, which means, as an Edomite, he probably studied the book of Obadiah, and the predictions by God of Obadiah, the predictions by Obadiah that the Edomites would be destroyed in the end of days, in the days of Messiah. So it could very well be that the reason why he was terrified, it was either him or the baby. When he heard the Messiah was born, he knew he was a dead man. But Edom was gone, and so Rome, like Edom, as far as the Jews were concerned, in the first century, destroyed the temple. Rome had a symbol of a pig as part of its mythology. And there were allusions to Edom dwelling in high places, the mountains of Seir. And all of a sudden that transfers to the idea of Rome and the eagles, which was an important Roman symbol. So all of this contributed to a new look at Rome, as Rome being Edom, the new Edom, the eternal enemy of Israel. This is interesting. This comes from the JewishVirtualLibrary.org. It's a Jewish scholarly site. So this is not my opinion. This is a historical site giving us some of the history of these times. Now, what's interesting here is this. What color are the uniforms? The uniforms, especially the cloaks of Roman soldiers. Red. In Hebrew, Edom. You can see why the Jewish people in those days could make such a connection. Today in Judaism, when Jewish believers are remembering the book of Esther, remembering those events of the heroine Esther, when they remember that God said, I will defeat Amalek and I will blot out their memory forever, Amalek is gone. But you'll hear it being taught in Judaism today that Amalek is really not just that group of people that came from the son of Eliphaz, Eliphaz being the son of Esau, but they're a picture of people who are extremely and terribly evil. People who are totally ungodly, cruel, vicious, the types of people who will kill innocents, women and children, cruel and evil people who will persecute the righteous. They're almost beyond salvation. Remember the Nazis. Remember the Nazis in the Holocaust. 6.5 million Jews, about the same number of Russians, both Russian citizens and Russian soldiers. 3 million Poles. And people who are disabled. And the gays. Slaughter them. Boy, you talk about a picture of a group that was so terribly and viciously evil. They wanted to kill all the Jews worldwide, just like Haman. And what's the color of the Nazi flag? Red. Edom. And so we consider the final days, the end of days. And we read about one who is so blatantly evil, so anti-God, so anti-Jew, anti-Christian, the one who has always been anti-Messiah, the one who has always been anti-Christ. In Revelation 12, verses 1 through 4, you can read about this one. It's not the beast. It's not this supposed man called the Antichrist. No, this one is a great dragon. And he has no name. That's another lesson. His name's not Lucifer. That's a big mistake. And his name's not Satan. Satan is the Hebrew word for what he is. It's not his name. Hasatan, the adversary. And what's his color? In Revelation 12, verse 3, the great red dragon. Edom. The spiritual Edom. In my studies, this lesson has been one of those lessons that has been very impacting on my life. I can't believe one small item in the book of Esther took me back all the way to Isaac and Rebekah and the birth of 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and all the way to the book of Revelation. One small piece right in the middle. All from that small detail in the scroll of Esther. And now perhaps we see the reason why God put that there. We see the purpose why God wanted us to understand that Haman was an Agagite. And all of a sudden we sit back and say, definitely, this is not by chance. This is not by lot, Purim. This is not the roll of the dice. It's not coincidence. This is by design. The design of El Elyon, God Most High. Shalom.